Welcome to County Fair on Waycross Community Media. I'm Waycross Government Programming Coordinator Dana Gagnon, and today we are going to speak with three students at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine who are working on a project with the Hamilton County Public Health Department. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So why don't we start by having you tell me about this project?
Yeah, so our project is really focused on, like you mentioned, working with the Hamilton County Public Health Department, and we're really interested in exploring how COVID and COVID-related changes has affected education within Hamilton County and the Cincinnati area, and we're focused on adolescent and high school students. So what we want to look for is how we can help the Hamilton County Public Health Department increase awareness around mask wearing within like an adolescent and high school population, and how we can maybe help them mitigate the COVID spread throughout the school system and among those populations. So we're here today to learn a little bit more about the community and how the community has seen COVID impact education and how maybe there might be avenues for us to help mitigate that spread through mask awareness.
And you're hoping to do this, I know we were just saying a minute ago, you're hoping to do this in the first few weeks of November. So if folks are watching this, who in the community are you hoping to hear from?
Yeah, so we're primarily looking for folks within the school systems. It kind of really depends on what level they're at, whether it be a superintendent, principal, teacher, anything like that. Basically, somebody who can give us an idea of what the effect of COVID has been on their particular school system, on their students, on the staff, and what the general attitudes are related to coronavirus and the protective measures that have been put in place for it. So we're really just interested in anybody that's got direct exposure to the students in the school setting right now with COVID, whether it be virtual or in person, just to try to get a basis of attitudes on, how COVID has gone and, what people's thoughts are about the preventive measures that are in place.
You're looking for people who are already working with kids and we are well into the school year. We have worked with, Waycross works with two different school districts. And we kind of, at least in those districts, get to see all the different kind of measures that they have to be ready for and how quick they have to be ready to change direction. And students that we've brought into the studio so they could tell us what it's been like for them. What kind of, as you go towards these interviews, Franco, I'll ask you, what kind of things do you expect? Do you have any sort of expectations ahead of time of, I kind of think these are the kind of things I'm going to hear?
Well, as we know, the opinions and experiences of people on this subject are as vast as anybody can imagine. So it's not so much expectations, but what we're really looking for is, again, just really trying to sample what it is that people in the population are experiencing firsthand and have that be the guiding force for what it is that we're planning to do, what it is we're trying to learn, and be able to apply that for the future.
So when you get this information, what are you going to do with it?
I think it's a really good question. So the end goal, like we mentioned, this first little part is to just gather information and gain some awareness about community and the community perspectives. And then we're hoping to, in the spring, roll out a mask wearing campaign in coordination with the Hamilton County Public Health Department, and just as a way to raise awareness about mask wearing, raise awareness about how it can help mitigate coronavirus spread. And we're hoping to find a way to make that effective, especially for high school students, as they are the ones out and about, out in the school system, trying to learn while also stay safe.
When it comes to mask wearing, which is the biggest of all the, and in some ways the easiest of all the measures that we can take, you are not peer-wise that far removed from your target audience here of high school students. You are removed from them. You're in a different environment now. But do you have any insights on what's the most challenging aspects, do you think, for high school students and adolescents when it comes to wearing a mask?
I think it's a tricky question. I can start, and I'm sure Franco and Mike have their own thoughts as well. For me, the first thing that was popping into my head was just education. I think that's a big component about the coronavirus in general, but especially the mitigation measures that have been put in place. I think if someone doesn't understand why they're being asked to wear a mask, then they're less likely to do so. So I think trying to find ways to shrink that education gap and ensure that people have information that can help them make a decision that could protect them and protect others. That was the biggest thing in my mind. I don't know what Frank or Mike have to say, though.
Education is definitely a big one. And that's something that you in this project can actually make a dent in. So that's kind of exciting. How about Michael and Franco? Do you have any insight on what do you think the challenges are in getting high school students, which is, you know, a season behind you, but what do you think the challenge is in getting them to wear masks?
I think that we are, just as a group, at about the age where we're old enough to not be cool to that audience anymore, but not quite old enough to have significant distance between us. I think it's very easy in this environment for young people to have that kind of distance from the real problems with this virus and, you know, its mortality and all of that, because we know it's significantly less dangerous to these younger people. And not only that, but we're still at the stage where a lot of people may not know anybody who's been severely affected by this. So I think we're uniquely poised as a group, again, just based on our age and experience, to be able to bridge that gap and kind of make the distant more personal. And hopefully that will start hopefully changing some minds, or at least raising some awareness.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're in a much easier spot to connect to this target group than, we won't say how old I am, but then I am. And that definitely helps you get extra insight, but hopefully have more of an impact. Hopefully it's one thing if a mom says you should be wearing this. Sure, mom, I should also be wearing a scarf, whatever. But for college students to be looking back on their high school peers and saying, oh yeah, this is something that's important and it's cool, it's fine, just do it. I feel like that can have a lot more effect from your direction than from my direction.
Speaking to the challenges that I think they're probably facing, I guess I would really focus in on the fatigue from coronavirus as a whole. It seems that most of the population's been experiencing. I think a lot of people are just tired of everything we've had to do and the drastic change that it's had on our lives, especially, high school age students. It's drastically changed the dynamic of the way that they deal with school, and the social engagement and then the academic engagement is just completely different. And I think a lot of it is hard to keep in perspective if you don't necessarily have the understanding of why masks work. And why they're used to prevent the virus spread. And you're kind of just focused on how it's negatively impacted your life. It's very easy to become fatigued and not want to wear it anymore, and just not want to deal with the restrictions that have been put in place due to coronavirus. So I definitely think that alone is probably a large barrier as well. Not so much just not knowing about the masks, but the juxtaposition of that in the place of all of the other negative things that have happened during the pandemic.
So what are some of the questions that you want to ask folks? And what are some of the questions you want to ask me?
The first one that we talked about a little bit already about what your job and your position was. So I think we have some good information about that. But we're also interested in, like, as you are in a position to coordinate for Waycross, how that has affected Waycross as a program and what you all are doing to help continue your work throughout, like, a COVID experience, and how that has changed your day-to-day as an organization.
Actually, that's an interesting question for me, because it's obviously a little different than from the school aspect. But things did change significantly, but whereas many businesses went on lockdown and got quiet and everybody kind of had their boredom time, we were just the opposite of that. We got very, very busy. Because we provide community access services for 4 towns and 2 school districts. Of course, sunshine laws mean that when the government meets, they have to meet where the public can see them. So there's nothing happening in back rooms and all of that, which is difficult when you can't be in the same room. So because we already had services in place with these 4 towns and 2 school districts, we were now shuffling all of our technology and equipment and just our small number of staff hours that we have here to help cover school board meetings and planning meetings and city meetings that normally we don't even cover. Normally it's enough that you can just walk into that boardroom and be there to hear it, but no one could do that anymore. So the fact that we were able to come up with technology to put in place so that these meetings can now be live on TV and live streaming, and not just something recorded for later meant that government could keep happening. So, and you don't think about these things, but in order for someone who purchased that storefront and they want to renovate it and put their business in there, and of course that's important to a town that this kind of stuff keeps happening. They need to get it. They have to get permits from town hall. They have to go to zoning meetings, and those zoning meetings have to happen. There have to be public hearings, and that was able to keep happening because we existed. So I've always felt really strongly about the fact that public access does something very important, connecting people to their local governments. But in this case, we were not just connecting people to their local government, but we were literally allowing it to still continue to happen. So that was important. But more related to this project, one of the things that we get to do is interview people from 2 different school districts. And we had students come in our studio and talk, 6th graders, and talk to us with their mom about what it's been like for them to start school, a whole new school year, virtually instead of in person. And there were some things that they liked about that. And then there were some things that were challenges about that we got to talk about directly with the students, and not so much just sort of hear it roundabout through administrators. And that was really nice, which I always really enjoy getting to do. And the other thing is that my job specifically, or this organization specifically, was able to do with the pandemic was graduations last year. All the schools that we cover, there are 3 high schools in our area, and they couldn't have public graduations. Plus there are more schools that we normally just hire us to do their graduations. So we, even though it took extra time and creativity, we were able to help them find a way to cover graduation in a way to still make it special for students. Whether that meant recording 1 student and family at a time, which can take a long time, but we'll put it all together, and now they still have their graduation. And we've always covered their sports, and we do it with our production truck with 4 cameras and HD and all that, which has always been neat. But right now, only a small percentage of parents are even allowed in the stadium. So getting to see, you think, oh, well, is it a big deal to see high school football? Well, it really is a big deal for their families. Also, this is Cincinnati, so high school football is a big deal. We were able to get permission from the Ohio Athletic Association to cover some of those games live, which means what we're doing with technology is allowing families and football fans to still be connected to the live games that they want. That's so much part of their fall, but be able to do it safely at home and not smush into the stadiums that are close to so many fans. So there are a lot of things I can't even, and there's more than that, I'm sure, but that is kind of a sampling of some of the things that our organization was able to do. And there's really just 3 full-time tech people here and a part-time. So it's been a lot of extra projects, but ones that we know are helping.
Next question we have here: what are the schools in your area or your district doing to combat COVID?
Great question. Because we record all their Board of Education meetings, so we get to see that in the planning sessions, as well as then following through with them and helping them communicate it out. And we have seen 2 school districts. We covered the Northwest Local School District and the Wintonwood City School District. Really have to be ready with multiple plans at once. Even as the school year was starting, there was no way for them to know which level was going to be allowed on the day they started. So I know at least Winton Woods decided we're going to give it an extra week before we even start. And that way our teachers will have another whole week to learn any new systems we have put into place, and we're not going to rush this, and we're going to make sure we're really ready so that it's less stressful for the teachers and the students. They both started with online learning as an option, and Winton Woods started with entirely online learning for the first quarter. And then their plan was to bring back the kids in, they call it blended learning. So it's half and half. So the kids are in the classroom. The idea was that if we could take our student population and split it in half, then we can have fewer people in the classroom on any one day. So some of those kids come to school 2 days a week, and then there's the other group that comes 2 days a week. And then on their off days, they're still learning virtually at home. And then the parents still had the option to keep their kid all virtual if they wanted to. And I think that's been the key with both school districts. And that was a big part of what Northwest School District's plan was, is parents' choice. So that to make sure they had the plans in place for any parent to select online learning if they just did not feel like it was going to be okay for their kid to be in the classroom. That's been, I hear over and over again from the parents and from the school district and from the two superintendents, that they want to make sure the parents know that we're making these decisions by, yes, we're listening to the governor, yes, we're listening to public health departments, but also we know we need to listen to the parents, because the situation in every household is different. Technology has been a big part of that, and making sure generally every household has a computer. And usually a computer is enough in a normal life. But when every member of the household has to do all of their daily tasks on the computer, you're going to have some competition for that computer. So the family that came to our studio, the mom is even going to school online. So they had, I think there were 4 kid students in the house and 1 adult in the house, all doing online school. And so the key component for them was the fact that the school sent them home with, every student got a Chromebook. And that Chromebook was a key part of that learning plan. And that's just the tip of it. There's a whole lot of details that they have put into place. One of the things that has impressed me the most, and I've seen this a lot in the Winton Woods district, is knowing that school is not just academics for many families, and that their level of food security is one of many non-academic things that they get from schools. So putting into place programs where lunches and even dinners can be picked up, and they have certain times where they have pickup times, and volunteers have sorted out all of the things that are going to go home with them. And that's key, because we can talk about academics, but that's not the only thing that students get from school.
I appreciate you speaking about that, because it is true that schools provide people a lot more than just sitting in a classroom 8 to 3. They provide almost comprehensive services to a lot of people that often goes unnoticed and unappreciated. So I'm glad you brought that up. If I can ask a follow-up question, might you know about how much COVID restriction policy is set locally versus towards, on the superintendent level or even state level?
What's really interesting is that because this is such a new situation, there's a lot of people, especially at the beginning of the school year, there was a lot of people not really being sure who was allowed to set certain policies. And that was very interesting to watch, because at the very beginning in last spring, a lot of that was happening at the state level, and the governor and the Dr. Amy Acton, they were making a lot of the decisions at that level. As of now, as we've moved forward, the governor has been really moving away from that. He can, to a certain degree, there are things he can do at that level. But as of just yesterday's conference that he's doing, and of course he's still doing regular conferences that everyone can tune into live at 2 o'clock on certain days. And he's really resisting doing things at the state level right now, because he really wants people to do things at the local level, which puts the Hamilton County Public Health, Hamilton County Board of Commissioners, it puts them in a different position. But really, district by district, as I talk to the superintendents, they're having to interpret what they're being told. And so it sounds like it's really coming to the district. Now, I don't want to put it just on the superintendent, though, because each of those districts has a school board, and they are all very much involved in that whole process, which is important, because otherwise the superintendent would just not really have any backup on that. They really need to have more than one person as part of that discussion, which is why I think it's so important that they have the parents involved in that discussion too.
Yeah, so you actually, and I don't know if you meant to do this, you ended up answering two of our questions at once, which was great. The next question we had was, how has COVID impacted the students' learning experience? I wonder if you have anything more to say on that. I know we kind of talked about the hybrid model, the virtual from home, computer access, and then being able to come back in time in full. Do you have anything maybe specifically about how students have responded to this? How are they learning? Do they think that learning from home has been easier, harder? Just kind of any general comments on that.
Just recently, I got to have a couple of the teachers as well as a couple of the students in the classroom. And so I kind of got to hear from both perspectives there. It sounds like, yes, there are some students when they're not in the classroom, they're not going to participate. It doesn't sound like that's going to be that different whether they're in one place or another, though. So I think that's not the main concern. It sounds like when most of the cases when teachers had a list of students who hadn't turned in work, it was a situation where they had forgotten how to click it directly into the right way they're turning it in. And of course, every school district is using a different program or application, but students have to do a thing that you probably do more often in college, but that means sixth graders who've never had to do this before have to turn in their program or their homework through a certain application. So it could be done. It could be completely completed and perfect and wonderful, but not turned in. And so that was something that I was hearing from moms. As a matter of fact, the sixth grade brothers that came into my room, they just wanted to remind folks that if you see a lot of, that was one of their pointers, is that if you see that your kid has a lot of stuff not turned in, don't get mad at them. They might have just forgotten how to do that. And I felt like that was from their own personal experience. There were things they liked about it. They liked being able to make lunch at home because they could make what they wanted. And they said, they admitted they didn't always like what was at lunch at school. But they also said sometimes they didn't like having to make lunch at home. Interestingly enough, I spoke to twins, but they are in different classes in the same grade. They don't have lunch at the same time. So they missed having lunch with friends. And one of them was in a class with a whole bunch of new students. He hadn't been in the class before, and they hadn't met in person yet. So he missed being able to see who was in his class, whereas his brother was in class with a bunch of kids he kind of already knew, so he didn't feel that as much. But it was interesting to see that for some situations and some kids that I have talked to, this has been fantastic. They like being able to not have to sit in the same spot and, maybe wiggle a little bit more. So for some learning styles, it's been really interesting and it's been helpful, but the knowing how to turn it in, that's a whole different way than they've ever had to do that before. Another thing that was interesting though is the boys both felt like they adapted to it much more quickly than their mom. And they kind of enjoyed having to help show their mom how to do online school because she was going to college for online. And they picked it up really quickly. And there were things that they were taking advantage of technologically that their mom said they have cell phones. She said they use them for everything else. So I make them use those cell phones to set alarms throughout the day to make sure they do things, to kind of put a little bit of that schedule back into their life. Another thing that was really interesting is that the boys became aware that if they just rolled out of bed and turned on their computer, they weren't ready to learn. Their minds were groggy, and I'm sure you've never gone to class that way. Their minds were, no, of course not. And they said they couldn't really even hear anything, and so they realized they had to set their alarm to get up early enough to do something like take a walk. And I thought, gosh, these are such self-aware boys. These boys are going to crush college because they have all this figured out. But so it was interesting. And their mom said that was something that struck her, was they had to take ownership of their school in a way that they hadn't before. Before it was just shove them into the right room. You're doing school now. And this way it was their job to learn. So they had to figure out some techniques that made it work for them. So I thought that was interesting.
Our next question focused on kind of guidelines and how the students have adapted to changes related to their learning. So we talked a lot about that just now in terms of how they're adapting, but we were curious a little bit more about what you know about guidelines that have been put in place within schools in terms of when students are going in, or like when they are coming to pick up their lunches, or when they are going in to learn, what types of safety guidelines are in place, and have students been able to follow those, or has there been issues with students following on those guidelines?
I haven't seen any negative issues at this point. I might not be the one that would be hearing them. I work closely with the school districts, but that's not necessarily the information that would come back my way. I have really seen a lot of work with the measures that they're taking though. Even the blended learning includes 1 day off for no group to be in there for an extra deep clean, because they're going to be in there and they're going to clean every day, but that gives another day in the middle for an extra deep clean where everybody's virtual that day. Being able to split the student population in half. So you remove the kids that are going to stay completely virtual, and now you have a smaller group, and now we're going to split that group in half and have them only come back in those smaller groups. That allows you to space them out a little, which is a really helpful measure, because that stuff you don't have to worry about the students following or not. That you have shrunk their whole population and limited exposure just in the mechanics of how that classroom is going to get set up now. So now whether or not they're willing to wear a mask or not, they're still in a smaller group, which was what you wanted. As far as the other things go, I don't see them on a daily basis, so it's kind of hard to see that, but it doesn't sound like I'm getting pushback because they're so excited to get to be in person and they want to be in person. And that was the thing that the boys talked about in the studio, was they just want to be in the same place with their friends again during lunch and things like that. So if that means wearing a mask, they'll put it on because they want to see their friends at lunch.
So the next question that we had was, are there any changes that you personally believe will help compliance with COVID guidelines and help reduce COVID spread?
I think one of the biggest helps is, one thing I'm seeing districts doing is letting parents have the choice. Not saying you have to come back or you have to be virtual, but saying, you know, as they move from all virtual, which had to be all virtual because we were at that point. But as schools start going back to blended, and I know districts are at different levels of that, continuing to allow parents the choice. Some parents know that their kids will just struggle for whatever reason with the mask. Maybe it's because they're not great at following directions, or maybe it's because they, for their sensory issues, or maybe they just don't wanna. And parents know that better really than anyone about their kids. So as parents can say, you know, my kid is not going to behave in a safe way in that environment, and I think we're going to stay online. And as long as they continue to have that choice, I think that will make a big difference. As soon as you say, whatever, they all have to do it, you're going to get the mix back in the room that will include the people that said, you know, we were willing to keep doing this at home just to, you know, reduce the spread a little bit. And so I'm always a big proponent of the parents' input on that. Not all parents have the ability, though, to be at home, and some kids need more supervision with their learning than others. Even just at the high school level, some high schoolers are very responsible, and you've got it, they've got it, they're fine. Some high schoolers need more kind of check-ins and supervision and attentiveness from an adult. They're maybe going to have a harder time at home, and so especially if their parent works a full time. So continuing to have that flexibility means we could keep the number in the classroom lower, and I think that would make a big difference. As far as masks, though, that has to be, that's why I'm glad you're doing this project, that has to be kind of a cultural pressure yeah, it's just a thing people do. We grab our things in the morning, we get out of the car, we throw on a mask. And at this point, culturally, you kind of see heavier mask buy-in from groups that are not necessarily interesting or cool to teenagers. So seeing more of that from college students, from peers, maybe from people that they look up to in popular culture would be really great and helpful too. That I feel like that's going to be that's going to be a key part of that.
Well, all right, we have about 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
So we should be wrapping up here. This last one we touched on a little bit at the beginning when we were just getting an overview of Waycross. We were kind of just curious to get a little bit more information, as like Waycross is a very important like medium for the community and for students and parents and teachers maybe to get information about meetings and things like that. Have you seen other districts using similar mediums to like spread information? Like we know you only work with Winton Woods and Northwest. Like, are there other districts using that type of medium? And also, what other mediums are like Winton Woods and Northwest local schools using to communicate with families and spread information throughout this process?
So both districts have a special part of their website that is where every family has their own login code, and that is where they can get the most up-to-date information. So both districts are highly, and I know many of them are really relying heavily on their websites to make sure that that is the first place parents go to get the latest information. And they've been updating it frequently and having a place that everyone can go to. The other place that I'm seeing used a lot is Facebook. And not just generic things shared on Facebook, which is generally a terrible idea, but each district has its own official Facebook page that they maintain daily and frequently and will promote things. And because of course, having a great website is fun and wonderful and useful, but it doesn't pop up in front of you and tell you there's something new on there. So it's almost been just as crucial to use an updated website in conjunction with social media, because the parents, I know the students are not on Facebook, but their parents are on Facebook. Because Facebook is for old people now. I'm aware of that. But fortunately, those old people are the very people you're trying to connect to when you want to connect to their moms and dads. So I see a lot of connection for both of our districts really on their social media pages, where they will constantly, as things change, as dates change, and food pickup practices and locations for things, and here's Chromebook pickup day, and here's the guidelines, and that is being used daily and frequently, and I see a lot of parents being aware of it and going to use it, which has been really helpful. So it's funny because social media is thought of as a rather kind of not very important sort of thing, but it's being used in a really very important connection kind of way. But yeah, each school has its own way of connecting directly to the parents that every parent is connected to. But beyond that, I think there's social media with that reminder that pops up in your feed because we're on Facebook way too often. And at least that means your district shows up in front of you. So that's one of the biggest things I'm seeing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely have been seeing a lot of social media campaigns as well. And just following up on briefly on that point about like Facebook versus other mediums for student use, of course.
Yeah.
So based on your interaction with students who maybe do have social media or do have their own like emails or something like that, have you heard of like high school students or older elementary school students getting information themselves through like Twitter or Instagram or through their email? Or is it usually coming like district to parent to student?
I think the bulk of it is going district to parent to student. I don't know that the students necessarily have taken ownership of the fact that that's a thing that they need to do. That being said, the teachers, the students, I think, are getting it directly from the teachers. So not so much through the district, like through the board and superintendent, but through their direct teacher, because all of those online learning platforms have places where teachers put messages for the students. And that's been where the students have been connecting. And actually, now that I say that, it's at a family level. So there's messages in that platform for the moms too, for the parents, moms and dads to go log in and check if there's any feedback the teacher needed to give. They can put that all right into that platform, which is important because if they're not face-to-face, if you're not picking up little, Frederick in the classroom, then the teacher's not going to mention to you, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you this. So there needed to be a place where that interaction can happen in the app. So that's all part of that platform that they're using. And I'm not going to speak in detail about the platform. Every school's used different ones, and I'm not really entirely sure what the details are for theirs. But that is something that when I had the boys and their mom in there, and that's one of the things the mom said was crucial, is check it on at least weekly basis, if not more, because it's really easy to get to the end of a quarter if you're trying to help your kids with virtual learning and not realize that they forgot how to turn in, like I said, they forgot how to turn in their things on the app. And so now it shows that they're missing like a whole semester's worth of assignments. Now you have to backtrack and say, did I finish that one? Where is that file? Oh no, this was weeks ago. I don't remember anymore. So if a parent isn't keeping up on a regular basis, then it's going to become a hole that the student has dug. And that's going to lead to some extra anxiety. That's real anxiety for a student is that endless pit of, I don't know if my assignments are in and things like that. So that's a really simple way that parents can help remove one level of anxiety for their kids, is just make sure that things get checked off in order without getting way behind on that.
Great. All right. I think we do have one more for you. So Franco, if you want to take us home.
Absolutely. So what's the status on mandatory testing for students and staff?
That's a good question. And I'll clarify, because when you're talking about schools and testing, you usually mean academic testing. But it sounds like you're talking about COVID testing.
Right.
So, okay, just making sure. To my knowledge, at this point, that has not been put into place, any kind of mandatory testing. It's been made available, and that's important. It's just to have it available. Also, there are multiple places in even if I'm just talking our local community, churches and YMCAs that have decided to offer their locations for regular 1 day a week, weekly testing. So that means everybody has an easy access place to get tested right in the community without having to go somewhere. Beyond that, I haven't seen any move towards mandatory testing on that. Now, there may be things I haven't been following, but that's not something I've heard them talking about. And I think this comes back to the same things that are happening at the state level, where the governor is saying, I'm going to try not to make something mandatory, but I really want you to do it. Please do it. And if you watch the governor's conferences, you'll see just about everyone, he is pleading, please wear the mask. I don't want to have to make you. Please wear the masks. So I think it's, we are a society that takes very seriously the fact that we have choices. So now we're just being asked to make good choices, but they're still trying to make them choices. You're going to take all this information and you're going to find out what are the biggest challenges to schools being able to put good measures in place. Do you have any kind of ideas that you're thinking about on what you'd like to create for them to help them out? I mean, it's a little tricky because you haven't got their feedback yet, but what are you thinking so far?
That's the golden question. So our initial brainstorming, that's why we asked a lot of questions about communication and how information is being spread, because we want to see how we can access those channels and share information from the health department and in collaboration with the health department. So our initial ideas were, how can we reach high school students? How can we get the words out to those people and those students and the people who are close to those students? And so we were leaning towards maybe exploring a social media campaign or exploring some sort of virtual measure, of course, to share information that high school students would frequent. So social media was the first thing that popped into our minds, but we definitely want to see what's working for districts, what's not working for districts, and how best we could get clear, concise, and helpful information to their students.
How did you come to this idea for a project in your class?
Yeah, so we're broken up into learning communities as our whole class. So we're all kind of clustered in groups of about, I think, 12 or 13 of us, and we're assigned to community agencies to work with. And we were assigned to the Hamilton County Public Health Department. And of course, with everything going on right now, problem number one is COVID. So it ended up being trying to find a way that we can help their mission to increase awareness and adapt to the guidelines as they change as this disease progresses. And just trying to find a way to be helpful to the residents of Hamilton County, which is their primary area of operation. So that was kind of how we ended up with this general project field. And then we kind of asked them about specifically if there were any areas that they maybe were having trouble with, or they were just interested in developing further. And they identified ensuring that the education is spread through the adult population and also the adolescent population too, and trying to find a way to make it a little bit more relatable. especially to high school age students. So that's kind of how our project got formed.
How many of you are working on this particular project?
I think there's 12 of us in our group.
Okay. So it's not just the three of you. You do have some more help on that. That's good. That's always nice. If people are watching this and they want to connect to you so they can share their insights, how can they do that?
So I would send an email I will give you the address. We're going to call out our communication aficionado. Her name is Maddie Michael. She's an incredible person. And if you would just email Maddie at MICHELMV@mail.uc.edu. She could get you in touch with us or with another group of interviewers, and we could have a conversation.
Folks that are interested in doing that, you need to hear from them in the first couple weeks of November. When do you think you'll be putting together your response to this? Once you're done with your input and you've decided what's going to be a good solution, when will we get to see what you've decided will help?
Yeah, also a great question. So like you mentioned, interviews throughout November. So we would definitely want to hear back within the next couple of weeks so we could get those conversations rolling in time. And then we will start working on creating the project kind of in response to these responses, as funny as that sounds, over the beginning of the early spring. So January, February time is when we'll be organizing and finalizing our campaign and our project, and that will be rolling out. So probably around February, March of next year. So relatively soon.
Okay, well, we'll have to look forward to seeing what you create. And if it's video based, you'll have to make sure you send it to us here at Waycross so we can take a look. We'll want to see that. Well, thank you so much for being willing to take some time this afternoon to talk to me about this. I look forward to seeing what kind of feedback you get, and in the broader the group of people you get to talk to. I feel like the more insights you're going to get and the more variety. So I hope a lot of folks will watch this and say, oh, I need to send them an email and see if they want to get any input from me too. So thank you so much. I look forward to your results.
Apologies, but can I jump in really quick? One last thing to mention. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the purpose of these interviews in the grand scheme of things. It's not about data points. It's not about what's going to appear on a bar graph. It's about guiding our understanding of the day-to-day struggles and understandings and experiences of the people who are actively in the community facing what it is that we're going to be studying. So if you are the kind of person who wants to help us with that, who wants to help guide our understanding on that subject, definitely send us an email at the aforementioned address, and we'll definitely see what we can do.
That's important to know. And I know I did get an email from Maddie, and it talks about your comments will be anonymous. We're doing ours for a program right now because we're doing it through Waycross, but that doesn't mean everybody's will be like that. You can do anonymous comments. You just really want to hear from people so that you can get all their feedback. And that's important because some folks might want to give you feedback, but they might be part of a district and they might feel like, I don't feel like I can say any of the challenges that we're having. So that's important for people to know. They go ahead, you need to hear the challenges because otherwise you can't work on a response to those challenges. Thank you again so much for being willing to do this. And do you have any last things you want to make sure that we leave folks with?
I think we pretty much nailed it. Definitely would echo what Franco just mentioned. This can all be anonymous. It's just for our purposes, and it would really help us out a lot to get kind of engaged in the community. But we really appreciate you and your time. Like we mentioned, this has been a huge help, and we can't wait to keep going with this. And we're really excited to see what we can roll out in the spring.
This is great. I really appreciated this conversation, and I really am looking forward to seeing what your response to the response is. And thank you for joining us for this discussion of how high school students are being affected by COVID-19. If you would like to be part of this discussion and give your input into this project, be sure to contact the email address on your screen. And I'm Dana Gagnon, Government Coordinator at Waycross Community Media, and I look forward to seeing you next time.